The heat shimmered off the asphalt, turning the lonely stretch of highway into a wavering mirage. Jax throttled down, the deep rumble of his Harley settling into a gravelly purr as he pulled into the deserted rest stop. It was a bleak patch of concrete and sun-scorched grass, boasting a single vending machine and a pair of graffiti-scarred picnic tables. He swung a heavy leg over the bike, popping the clasps on his leather vest. The air was thick, promising a storm that never came. He was just reaching for his water bottle when a small sound cut through the hum of the cicadas. A voice, tiny. He turned, his eyes scanning the empty lot. There was only one other vehicle, a dusty blue sedan parked at an odd angle, too close to the curb, and standing beside it, a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6, a slip of a thing in a pink t-shirt with a faded cartoon unicorn on it. Her blonde hair was stuck to her forehead with sweat, and her small hands were twisted together in front of her. She was staring right at him. Jax was used to stares. A man his size, covered in ink from his knuckles to his neck, with a beard that could scare small animals, didn't exactly blend in. But this was different. There was no fear in her eyes, just a quiet, desperate plea. He grunted, turning back to his bike. Not his business. Probably waiting for her parents to use the restroom. "Mister?" The voice was closer now. He sighed, the sound a low growl in his chest. He turned around fully. She stood 10 feet away, a small, still figure in the overwhelming heat. "Yeah?" he asked. His voice was rough from the road dust. She took a hesitant step forward. "My mom," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "She didn't wake up." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Jax froze, his hand hovering over his saddlebag. A dozen scenarios flickered through his mind. A prank. A trap. He'd seen enough ugliness on the road to be suspicious of everything. He looked past her to the sedan. The windows were all rolled up, trapping the brutal midday sun. He couldn't see inside clearly through the glare. "What do you mean she didn't wake up?" he asked, keeping his tone level. "Is she sleeping?" The little girl shook her head, a single tear tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. "I tried. I shaked her and shaked her, but her eyes won't open. We were playing the quiet game, but she's too good at it now." The quiet game. A cold dread, heavier than the oppressive heat, began to settle in Jax's stomach. He took a slow step toward the car, his boots crunching on the loose gravel. The little girl didn't back away. She just watched him, her blue eyes wide and waiting. "What's your name, kid?" "Lily." "All right, Lily, I'm Jax. You stay right behind me, okay?" She nodded, her small hand reaching out and clutching the back of his leather vest as he passed. The contact was so light he barely felt it, but it anchored him. This was real. He reached the driver's side window and peered in. A woman was slumped against the steering wheel, her head lolled to the side. Her face was pale, her lips tinged with blue. A bottle of water had rolled onto the passenger floor mat. The keys were in the ignition, the car silent. The air inside had to be an oven. "Ma'am?" he called, his voice sharp. He knocked on the glass, first gently, then harder. Nothing. Not a twitch. He tried the door handle. Locked. He circled the car, checking every door. All locked. He looked back at Lily. She was chewing on her lip, her small body tense. He saw it then, the faint tremor in her hands, the slight sway as she stood. She was fading in this heat, too. How long had they been here? "Lily, how long has your mommy been sleeping?" She shrugged, her eyes filling with tears again. "Since the sun was over there," she said, pointing vaguely to the east. Hours. They had been here for hours. His mind raced. Call the cops? By the time they got out here, it could be too late, for both of them. He looked at the window again, then at his hand. He'd worked as a bouncer, a mechanic, a repo man. He knew the precise, ugly sound glass makes when it breaks. He also knew what it would look like. Him, a man who fit every stereotype of a criminal, smashing his way into a car with a lone child watching. Any cop rolling up on that scene would draw their weapon first and ask questions later. But then he looked at the woman's still face and at the little girl whose small hand was still balled up in the back of his vest. There was no choice. Not really. Have you ever been in a situation where every instinct screamed at you to act, even when the world might judge you for it? That's the moment heroes are made, not in the grand gestures, but in the small, terrifying decisions no one else is there to see. If you believe in the power of trusting your gut, give this a thumbs up and let us know in the comments. Okay, Lily, Jack said, his voice softer now. I'm going to get your mommy out, but I have to be loud to do it. I need you to go stand by that tree over there and cover your ears. Can you do that for me? She looked from him to the car, her small brow furrowed with worry. It's okay, he reassured her, kneeling down to her level. It's just to open the door, like a magic trick, a really, really loud one. A tiny smile flickered on her lips. She nodded and ran over to the scrawny, sun-beaten tree at the edge of the lot, pressing her hands over her ears. Jack stood up. He took off his heavy leather jacket, the one with the club patches he'd long since retired from. It felt strange to be without its weight. He wrapped it carefully around his right fist, making sure the thickest part covered his knuckles. He chose the rear passenger window, farthest from the woman in the child's usual seat. He took a deep breath. The world seemed to slow down. He could hear the frantic beat of his own heart, the distant drone of a semi on the highway, the tiny scuttling of an insect in the grass. He focused on a single point on the glass. One clean shot. That's all it would take. He drew his arm back and swung. The impact was a dull thud, followed by a crystalline explosion. The tempered glass didn't shatter into shards. It spiderwebbed into a million tiny cubes and collapsed inward, with a sound like a waterfall of diamonds. He didn't wait. He carefully broke away the remaining pieces around the frame with his jacketed fist, then reached inside, his arm scraping against the jagged edges. His hand found the lock and pulled it up. A click echoed in the silence. He opened the back door, then leaned in to unlock the driver's side. A wave of suffocatingly hot, stale air washed over him. It smelled of plastic, old coffee, and something else. Something metallic and sick. He opened the driver's door and gently eased the woman back against the seat. Her skin was cold and clammy despite the heat. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. For a terrifying second, there was nothing. Then he felt it, faint, thready. But there, her wrist was limp. As he moved her arm, something glinted in the sunlight. A medical alert bracelet. He squinted to read the small engraving. Diabetes type 1. Everything clicked into place. This wasn't heat stroke, it was a diabetic coma. A blood sugar crash. She needed sugar, and she needed it 10 minutes ago. But more than that, she needed paramedics. He pulled out his phone, his thumb swiping across the screen. He dialed 911, his other hand already unbuckling the woman's seatbelt to make sure her airway was clear. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional. I'm at the northbound rest stop on Highway 87, about 10 miles south of Red Creek, Jack said, his voice a low, steady rumble. I have an unresponsive female, mid-30s. Found her in a locked car with her young daughter. She's breathing. Pulse is weak. She's wearing a medical bracelet for type 1 diabetes. I believe she's in diabetic shock. He gave the description of the car, his bike, himself. He left nothing out. He knew how this would look, and he wanted the record straight from the beginning. Sir, did you break into the vehicle? Yes, he said without hesitation. The child said she'd been unresponsive for hours. The car was locked. I broke the rear passenger window to gain entry. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Okay, sir. An ambulance and sheriff's deputies are en route. Your name? Jax. Just Jax? It'll do. He ended the call and turned his attention back to Lily. She had taken her hands from her ears and was watching him, her eyes round with a mixture of fear and awe. He walked over to his bike, grabbed his water bottle, and brought it to her. Here, he said, unscrewing the cap. Take a drink. Slow sips. She drank greedily, the water dribbling down her chin. When she was done, she looked back toward the car. Is Mommy's magic trick done? Jax's throat felt tight. Almost, kid. The doctors are coming. They're going to help her wake up. He sat down on the hot curb and she sat beside him, her small shoulder pressing against his arm. They sat in silence, watching the highway. The minutes stretched into an eternity. He could feel the tension in her small body, the unspoken fear. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't good with kids. He wasn't good with people. Period. So he just sat there, a silent, solid presence. Sometimes that's all you can be. The first siren was a faint wail in the distance. It grew steadily, a promise of help tearing through the thick summer air. Lily sat up straighter, her eyes fixed on the horizon. A sheriff's car appeared first, followed closely by an ambulance. They pulled into the rest stop, lights flashing, bathing the scene in strobes of red and blue. Two paramedics jumped out, their movements efficient and practiced. A deputy approached Jax, his hand resting near his sidearm. "You the one who called this in?" the deputy asked, his eyes taking in Jax's appearance, the shattered window, the unconscious woman. "Yeah," Jax said, not moving from the curb. "She's diabetic. Bracelets on her left wrist." The paramedics were already working on her, checking her vitals, hooking up an IV. One of them called out, "Blood sugar is 28. We need to push glucose now." The deputy's posture softened almost imperceptibly. He looked from the frantic work of the medics to the little girl huddled against Jax's side. "You did the right thing," he said. It wasn't praise, just a statement of fact. They loaded the woman, Sarah. He heard one of the medics use her name after finding her wallet, onto a gurney. As they were about to lift her into the ambulance, Lily shot to her feet. "Mommy!" she cried, starting to run toward her. Jax caught her gently by the arm. "Whoa, easy there, kid. They're taking her to the hospital to make her better. You can see her soon." A female paramedic knelt down. "Honey, we're going to take good care of your mom. Is there anyone we can call? Grandma or Grandpa?" Lily nodded, sniffling. "Grandma's number is on the fridge." The paramedic sighed softly. "Okay, you'll have to ride with the officer. We need the space in here to work on your mom." Lily's face crumpled. Her eyes darted to the deputy, then back to Jax. She shook her head, her little hand gripping his jeans. "No, I want to go with Jax." Everyone stopped. The deputy looked at Jax. The paramedics looked at Jax. He felt like a bug under a microscope. A strange, protective instinct flared in his chest. He wasn't going to let this terrified little girl ride alone with a stranger in a cop car. "I'll follow the ambulance to the hospital," Jax said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "She can ride with me." The deputy opened his mouth to object. Protocol, liability, a dozen other reasons why it was a bad idea. But he looked at Lily's desperate face and at the quiet certainty in Jax's eyes. He made a decision. "All right," the deputy said, nodding to the paramedic. "We'll call Child Protective Services from the hospital, get the grandparents' contact info from the house. For now, let him go with you." He looked at Jax. "Don't make me regret this." Jax just nodded. He helped Lily onto the seat in front of him, fitting a spare helmet on her head that he kept for emergencies. It was far too big, but it was better than nothing. "Hold on tight," he said, and her small arms wrapped around his waist like steel bands. He fired up the bike, the engine roaring to life. He fell in line behind the ambulance, its sirens now silent as it sped down the highway. And as they rode, with the wind whipping past them and a little girl holding on for dear life, Jax realized he couldn't just ride away from this. He was in it now until the end. The hospital waiting room was cold and sterile, a universe away from the sun-baked highway. The air smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Jax felt profoundly out of place. His leather and denim were a stark contrast to the pale greens and beiges of the room. Nurses bustled by, their soft-soled shoes squeaking on the linoleum, their eyes flicking over him with polite curiosity. Lily sat in the chair next to him, her small legs swinging. The oversized helmet sat on the floor by his boots. She hadn't said a word since they arrived. She just stared at the double doors that had swallowed her mother, her small face a mask of worry. Jax had bought her a bag of chips and a soda from a vending machine, but they sat untouched on the table between them. He should have left. His job was done. He'd handed the situation over to the professionals. He was a stranger, a passerby, but the memory of Lily's small arms wrapped around his waist, the absolute trust in that desperate grip, had forged a bond he couldn't just sever. So he stayed. An hour crawled by, then another. Finally, a doctor came through the doors, her face tired but kind. She looked around the waiting room, and her eyes landed on them. "Family of Sarah Miller?" Jax stood up, Lily scrambling to her feet beside him. "We're here for her," he said, his voice sounding rough in the quiet room. The doctor's gaze softened as she looked at Lily. "Your mom is going to be okay," she said gently. "She was very lucky. Her blood sugar was dangerously low. A little longer and, well, she's very lucky someone found her." Her eyes shifted to Jax. "The paramedics told me what you did. You saved her life." Relief so potent it almost buckled his knees washed over him. He just nodded, unable to speak. She's stable now, but she'll be asleep for a while, the doctor continued. We've contacted her parents. They're on their way. They live about 2 hours from here. 2 more hours. Jax looked down at Lily, who was now clutching his hand. He couldn't leave her to wait alone. We'll wait, he said, and so they did. Lily finally ate some of the chips, her anxiety easing now that she knew her mom was safe. She started talking, her words spilling out in a rush. She told him about her cat, Sparkles. She told him her favorite color was unicorn pink. She told him her mom made the best pancakes in the whole world. Jax just listened, grunting or nodding in all the right places. He was a stranger learning the intimate topography of a life he had stumbled into. When a well-dressed, frantic couple in their 60s burst through the waiting room doors, Jax knew they were Sarah's parents. The woman had Sarah's eyes. "Lily!" she cried, rushing forward and scooping the little girl into her arms. "Grandma! Grandpa!" Lily hugged her tightly, then wiggled out of her grasp and pointed a small finger at Jax. "That's Jax," she announced, her voice full of pride. "He used a magic trick to save Mommy." The grandparents froze, their gazes falling on the large tattooed man standing awkwardly by a vending machine. Suspicion and fear warred with confusion on their faces. Jax could see the calculation in their eyes, the same one the deputy had made. This man did not fit the picture of a hero. "He broke the window," Lily added helpfully. The grandfather, a tall man with a stern face, took a step forward. "Who are you? What happened?" Jax explained it all, his voice low and factual. He told them about finding Lily, the locked car, the medical bracelet, the 911 call. He left out the part about his own fear, his hesitation. He just gave them the facts. When he finished, there was a long silence. The grandmother's eyes filled with tears. You saved them," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She crossed the space between them, and to Jax's complete astonishment, wrapped her arms around him in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she sobbed into his leather vest. "Oh God, thank you." The grandfather extended a hand, his own eyes glistening. "We are in your debt, son. Anything you need. Anything at all." Jax just shook his hand, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "No debt," he mumbled. "Just glad I was there." They insisted he stay until Sarah woke up. Jax found himself drinking bad coffee and making stilted conversation with Sarah's father, a retired engineer named George. He learned that Sarah was a single mom, a fiercely independent graphic designer who managed her diabetes with meticulous care. This episode was a fluke, a perfect storm of a delayed lunch, unexpected traffic, and brutal heat that had caused her blood sugar to plummet with terrifying speed. Hours later, they were finally allowed to see her. She was pale and hooked up to monitors that beeped softly, but she was awake. Her eyes, hazy with confusion, found Lily first, then her parents. And then they found Jax, lingering in the doorway, feeling like an intruder. "Who?" she started, her voice raspy. "That's Jax, Mommy," Lily chirped, climbing onto the bed beside her. "He's our hero." Sarah's eyes met Jax's. He saw the confusion give way to a dawning, profound understanding. He saw the gratitude. He saw the beginning of a question she didn't know how to ask. Why would a stranger do this for me? He just gave her a short, awkward nod and backed out of the room, intending to finally slip away. He'd done his part. The family was reunited. It was time to get back on the road. He was almost to the elevator when George caught up to him. "You're not leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "Sarah wants to thank you properly. We all do. You have a place to stay tonight?" Jax shrugged. "A motel, maybe." "Nonsense," George said, clapping a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're staying with us." And for the first time in a decade of lonely roads and transient living, Jax didn't argue. He stayed. That one night turned into a weekend. The weekend turned into a strange and wonderful new routine. Jax had been on his way to a temporary construction gig in another state, but he called and canceled it. Something held him there. When Sarah was released from the hospital, she was weak but determined. She looked at Jax, this hulking, quiet man who had saved her and her daughter, and she didn't know what to say. Words like, "thank you," felt laughably small, so instead she asked him to stay for dinner. He did. That first dinner was awkward. Jax felt like a wild animal that had wandered into a suburban home. But Lily was the bridge. She chattered away, treating Jax like he'd always been a part of their lives, seating him at the table between her and her grandpa. Slowly, the strangeness faded, replaced by a comfortable rhythm. Jax found himself fixing a leaky faucet for Sarah's mom, Ellen. He helped George clear a fallen tree in the backyard. He showed Lily how the engine on his bike worked, her small hands carefully touching the cool chrome. He had never been part of a family, not really. His own had fractured long ago. But here in this quiet house filled with the aftermath of trauma and the overwhelming power of gratitude, he felt a sense of belonging that was both terrifying and addictive. He became Uncle Jax. The title was bestowed by Lily one Sunday afternoon as he was teaching her how to properly wash his Harley. It stuck. Sarah and Jax developed a quiet, powerful friendship. There was no romance, but something deeper. A bond forged in crisis, built on a foundation of pure, unadorned gratitude. She saw past the ink and the leather to the steady, reliable man underneath. He saw past her fragility to the fierce, resilient mother who loved her daughter more than anything. They were two lonely people who had found an anchor in each other. Jax ended up getting a job at a local garage. He rented a small apartment a few miles from Sarah's house. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just passing through. He was putting down roots. Years melted away. The Rest Stop Rescue became the bedrock of their shared history, the story they told every year on the anniversary. They called it their family day. 12 years later, Jax sat in the front row of a high school auditorium, the squeak of the folding chairs a familiar sound. He wore a clean black shirt, but the worn leather vest was still his go-to. Beside him, Sarah wiped a tear from her eye. On her other side, George and Ellen beamed with pride. On the stage, a confident, poised 18-year-old Lily stood at the podium, the valedictorian sash draped over her graduation gown. "We are often taught that heroes wear capes or uniforms," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the auditorium. "We're told they are larger-than-life figures who perform impossible feats. But I learned very young that heroes don't always look the way you expect. Sometimes they ride Harleys and are covered in tattoos. Sometimes they're the stranger who pulls over on the side of the road when no one else will." Her eyes found Jax in the crowd. She smiled, a brilliant, heartfelt smile that lit up her whole face. "A hero is just someone who sees a need and isn't afraid to act," she continued. "Someone who is willing to break a little glass to let the light in. My hero saved my mother's life. He saved my life too. He taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you when you're at your lowest. It's about the people who choose to stay." Jax felt a familiar tightness in his throat. He looked at Sarah and she reached over, her hand finding his. Her skin was warm. Her pulse was strong and steady beneath his fingers. Later that evening, the four of them, Jax, Sarah, and her parents, sat at their favorite diner. Lily was out with her friends celebrating. The waitress poured them all coffee. Sarah raised her mug. "To Jax," she said, her voice soft. "Our guardian angel in biker boots." George and Ellen raised their mugs. "To Jax." Jax felt his face flush. He ducked his head and raised his own mug. "Just did what was right," he mumbled, the same words he'd said all those years ago. But now they felt different. They weren't a dismissal. They were a creed, a simple truth that had altered the course of all their lives. One man, one choice, one moment of listening to that small voice, both Lily's and the one in his own gut. It hadn't just saved a life that day. It had built one. It had built a family. The power to change a life is in all of us. It's in the quiet observation, the gut feeling you can't shake, the decision to speak up when something feels wrong. You don't need a cape to be a hero. You just need to pay attention. If you've ever witnessed an act of everyday heroism, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove courage comes in all shapes and sizes.